This is your final chapters. It is 21st of March, 2023. I am Sassy Mint Grace, and we're going to begin with chapter 57. The room was silent as the gang at the Hope House held their breath, waiting to hear the magic word of the hour, innocent. Socrates was asleep, lying at Carrie's feet. Helen had gone to the bathroom after she finished her chow mein, and they heard her shout when she lowered herself onto the cold porcelain toilet that Aaron had forgotten to lower the seat on. He apologized profusely, and then he added, "At least I lifted the seat. Lots of men don't." The women snickered. Carrie cheered, "Yay, Aaron! Congrats for common courtesy." The other woman applauded. They all enjoyed a chuckle that relieved the tension from the waiting, at least a little. At last, the camera panned around the courtroom. There was MJ. She was holding a look of composure. Carrie was glad to get a glimpse of her wife, although it was much shorter than she wanted. She'd spent the night before tossing and turning and praying that God, in His infinite wisdom, would see fit to give her back her precious wife. They waited breathlessly to hear if the jury was back. It was. Chapter 58. MJ closed her eyes and took a deep, long breath. The jury was filing back into the courtroom while they waited. She looked at Mark for some indication that he was confident or nervous. The man wouldn't make eye contact. That was not a good sign, she felt. Then she looked over at the DA. He was sitting back in his chair. His files were closed, laptop off, studying his Rolex. She looked out at the treetop that was visible within the window frame and the blue sky beyond it. She recognized a mourning dove take off from a branch to fly away. She drummed her fingers impatiently until her lawyer gave her a look. Did he smile? She wasn't sure. Trying to take the emotional temperature of the room, all she could sense was lukewarm. She sighed again before looking up at the judge. He'd ordered the jury foreman, or in this case, forewoman, to come close up and show him the jury's verdict. She walked up to the bench in slow motion, it seemed to MJ. Was the woman trying to torture her on purpose? At last, she passed the paper to the judge, who looked at it and then passed it back to her. Chapter 59. Carrie reached over and grabbed Helen's hand as they waited the pronouncement. Aaron shifted nervously in his loaded position on the carpet at their feet and patted the cat. The cat was comatose and didn't move. Carrie scratched at his ears until, again, she looked down at her fingertips and saw blood. At her ears, not the cat's ears, sorry. God, would they stop dragging this out, she thought. She shifted to digging at her right hip to the fabric of her slacks, at least. She moaned in the suffering at the waiting. Aaron picked up her other hand, so she would cease scratching. Helen softly pronounced, "It's going to be okay, Carrie. It'll all be okay." Aaron mentally crossed his fingers. If they found her guilty, he would do whatever he could to pay for appeals. This woman on trial in his eyes was a hero, not a criminal. Chapter 60. The judge asked MJ if she had anything to say before he read the verdict. She considered this and thoughtfully answered, "Yes." He told her to stand up. She stood and pressed her shoulders back and looked around the room, engaging as many eyes as possible before she spoke. She said, "Before I go, I want you all to know that I am not now or never have been a terrorist. My fondest wish is to live long enough to see the people on this planet join together in one heart to take care of our babies, our parents, and our grandparents. You know, despite all the things that are different about us, there are several ways we are identical. We all need safe water, air, arable land, and protection from the elements. We all love our families, even if we fight with them at times, but when push comes to shove, we generally stick together. We've only one lifeboat in this galaxy called the Milky Way. We must learn to play and work nicely together if we are to survive. Please, for your own sake and the sake of your grandkids, stop and look at what we have. It's not too late to salvage it if we work together." She sat down. A pregnant pause claimed the room as the assembled waited for the judge to tell the forewoman to read the paper in her hand. For MJ, time stood still. At last, the judge told the women before the gathering in the room to go ahead. She was an attractive woman with blonde highlighted hair. She composed herself and took a deep breath before she began. MJ flinched under the sword still hanging over her head. How could this woman be so mean? She wondered if Carrie would be able to see this on TV live or if she'd have to wait for it to be broadcast later. She wondered if Carrie was home alone and helplessly watching her wife's fate announced in another country. She checked the clock again. The second hand had barely moved. Time seemed frozen. The cameras all wheeled around her so the expression could be caught as her future was pronounced. The cameraman closest to her stunk of cigarette smoke and smoked fish. God, she had a powerful nose. The woman began. In the case of MJ Hope against the United States of America on the charge of terrorism, we find the defendant, Chapter 61. Now Aaron slid out of his lotus position, up onto the couch, and on the other side of Carrie. He slipped his arm around her shoulders, as they all fervently hoped. Not guilty. MJ jumped up and grabbed her lawyer and gave him a loud smacking kiss on each cheek. Respect to references. This is a work of fiction, yet buried within while I quote some internet sites. Many are from the B'nai Baruch Institute. I hope you will look there with an open mind. There are quotes from other kinds of sites as well. I found it useless to reference these because when you search for them down the road, they may be gone. The internet is a fickle resource, unlike the Library of Congress or the Vatican. Well, maybe. The scientists are real, and the science is real that I've quoted. And now we have afterwards. And afterwards, it's going to be interesting for me to be able to pull these up. I'm going to try my level best to do this. And maybe I can. Who knows? Afterwards. This book and its characters are not meant to be an encouragement to suicide. The fact is that there are many suicides happening all over the world for various reasons that we may not understand. The despair is a very realistic background of what it is like to be a part of this world, but still have belief that there is a power greater than us. How we determine the will of that power becomes either the light or the darkness that we make our choices from. A brief treatise on suicide. Much of Western society's law and tradition was shaped by the values of ancient Greece, where suicide was considered a disgraceful act, and those guilty of it were denied the dignity of death rights. Life was considered to be given by the gods, making mankind the property of the gods. Historically, there have been two types of suicide: social or institutional, as in the duty of slaves and wives of the deceased. Older, sick tribe members sacrificed themselves for the benefit of the young and healthy, and nobles who lost faith would choose suicide rather than to live with the humiliation. And then there was a personal suicide used as an escape mechanism from insufferable life situations and mental and physical ailments. Aristotle thought it was a sin against the fatherland, which is ironic as we consider requirements of war. Yet in certain cases it was considered an heroic act, as in Themistocles, who poisoned himself rather than reveal his countrymen to the Persians. The school of Stoics felt it appropriate in some cases, as in serving the state, avoiding committing illegal or immoral acts, poverty, chronic or mental illness, made death more attractive than life, and finally, for one's honor. The much quoted Pliny the Elder believed that as the herbs existed for a painless death, the Creator must approve. Seneca wrote it was an acceptable way to end suffering. He actually spelled it out. Quote, I will not flee old age if I maintain my wits, but if age starts to weaken my reason and starts to destroy my possibilities, if it only allows me to keep breathing but not my life, then I will part from my body. I do know that if I must suffer without hope of succor, then I will leave life, end quote. His philosophy was to, quote, voluntarily balance the motives for and against, and on the basis of advice, decide for life or death. The Roman Empire accepted suicide as positive if performed to prevent dishonor or an expression of grief over a loved one or committed in the service to the country. But as time passed, the cultural attitudes changed. The Christian influence accepted martyrdom and life after death seemed much more important, and eternity a preferable place. During the 14th century, suicide became banned and viewed as lack of faith in God's grace or rejecting life, God's gift to man. Augustine considered it an unforgivable sin. He drew up 4 arguments to justify probably the roots of our cultural attitudes today. Number 1, suicide is murder unless it is an undisputed command of God. 2, a person who takes his own life is a murderer who has killed a man. 3, a true and noble soul accepts suffering and pain. Trying to escape from it is a sign of weakness. And 4, a person who commits suicide is the worst sinner. Not only does he escape from fear and temptation, but also robs himself of absolution. So that's enough to understand how our culture has been historically influenced to treat suicide. But, gentle reader, if you are considering taking your own life, I ask you these questions. Do you believe in and practice Christianity? Do you believe the state owns you? Do you believe in personal sovereignty or self ownership? Do you believe in a deity? Do you believe that deity values suffering or is merciful? And last words. MJ found a lighted path to follow on her personal journey, but it is one path. There is no one right path. The right path for you is the one that makes you smile, your heart thrum with joy, the one that calls to you and says, you are in the right where you are supposed to be. It is the one song calling you that makes you glad to wake up. I hope you find your lighted path. XOXO, Sassy Mint Grace. So, my friends, we've come to the end of the road, and I hope that you've enjoyed this little sojourn into the very twisted and unpredictable mind of Sassy Mint Grace. And hope you find your lighted path.